And in verse 12, Joel says, turn to me with your heart and with fasting, with weeping and mourning. Rend your hearts, not your garments, and return unto the Lord your God, for he's graceful and merciful, slow to anger and of great kindness, and repents of the evil. So this is a call to return to the Lord. And I believe the challenge today that we must preach is return to the Lord. But it's even deeper than that, because he says then, if you move on to verse 18, then will the Lord be jealous for his land and pity his people. The Lord will answer and say to his people, behold, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and you will be satisfied. And in actual fact, he says, I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. And I will remove the enemy far off. And in verse 21, fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord will do great things. So what we're looking at here is the power of God displayed before Jesus returns. And the whole of this prophecy is concerned about this. And if you look then into verse, I'm still in chapter 2. If you look at verse 23, be glad then and rejoice, you children of Zion. Rejoice, for he has given you the former rain moderately, and he will come down for you the rain, the former rain, and the latter rain in the first month. And then the floors shall be full of wheat, the fats shall overflow with wine and oil, and I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. Now, what I sense very much here is the fulfillment of prophecy. Because if you move on to verse 28, it will come to pass that I will pour my spirit on all flesh. That is the prophecy of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Your old men shall dream, your young men shall see visions, and on the servants and handmaidens I will pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and the earth, blood and fire and pillar of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. But what I'm seeing here is so strongly that this is talking about the battle that comes when the Lord returns. But that in this, it's he's saying, he will give you the former rain moderately, and then the latter rain. Now, it's very clear from Joel's prophecy that the first rain is moderate, the latter rain is without limit and much more powerful. And what I've always believed, that this is the prophecy regarding the coming of Christ, that he would pour out his Holy Spirit, the first rain, and that was the day of Pentecost, but that he would send the rain, the power of the Holy Spirit, in an even greater form, the latter rain, and that I believe that literally we are living in the days of the latter rain. And that I believe that Joel is actually promising here that the latter rain will be greater than the first. And I've always believed that the first outpouring of the Holy Spirit, which was seen a century ago, because we're celebrating more than 100 years, well, the Holy Spirit's been present right through the whole of the church, but we do recognize that there was a powerful outpouring of the Holy Spirit in just over 100 years ago. It followed the Welsh revival, and by that was 1904, 105, and by 1911, the power of the Holy Spirit was outpoured, and we saw a restoration of the miracles. And I believe that literally that this is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit before Jesus comes back. But what I'm sensing is that this outpouring would be greater. And the more I read this, the more I see that the outpouring is greater in this latter outpouring than in the first. And when I was growing up, I sensed that we should see far more. I mean, the more I read Joel 2 and Joel 3, the more I'm convinced that we have not yet fully seen the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. I believe that, in fact, the whole of my life, this is what I've concentrated on in the whole of my ministry, to see the greater outpouring of the Holy Spirit than happened on the day of Pentecost. And I see that this is literally, and the more I read Joel 2 and going into Joel 3, the more that I see that this immediately precedes the return of Christ. Because he says, in verse 28, will come to pass after that first outpouring, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons, your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. And in verse 30, I will show wonders. I mean, this is what I've been living for. This is what the whole of my ministry has been concentrating on. I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth. And before the sun is turned into darkness and blood, it comes to pass that before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes, that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord will be delivered. And what I'm seeing is a massive spiritual awakening that will come. And then at the end of this, what you see is, and it's very, very clear, that in chapter 3, verse 12, let the heathen be awakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge the heathen. And this is, look at verse 14, multitudes in the valley of decision. The day of the Lord is near. And he's talking about all the prophetic signs that will happen. But he says in verse 13, put in the sickle, the harvest is ripe. Come on, the press is full, the fat's overflowing. Multitudes in the valley of decision. And I absolutely believe, and I've seen it in my ministry, this outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And to me, the reason that Joel is speaking in this way, because it was understood in his days that in Israel, when you had the harvest, when you sowed the seed, you got the first rain. And then before the harvest in Israel, you would have the last rain, which would swell the grain and increase the harvest. And I believe that that's literally what Joel is referring to, that when the Holy Spirit was first outpoured, it was at the beginning of the church. When did the church begin? The church didn't begin during the ministry of Jesus. When did the church begin? The church began on the day of Pentecost. Come on. When the disciples were gathered in that upper room, in fear, they'd locked the doors and closed the windows for fear. There were 120 of them, and they were in fear of persecution. And that's when the Holy Spirit came, and the power was so great. You know what happened? Peter jumped up on the roof and began to preach. And in that first great evangelistic meeting, 3,000 men were converted. And if the proportion of men and women was the same in those days as now, it would meant a great deal more. It could have meant 10,000. This was the first major crusade. There's Peter preaching on the top of the upper room. But this was the beginning. This is how the church began.